This is another opportunity to see my video on propagating cuttings, which featured in episode 7. Today I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about cuttings. Now, I'm sure some of you have been taking cuttings for years, but I want to go through a range of different methods, so that whether you're a complete beginner or you've been taking cuttings for years, hopefully there'll be something in this video that you'll find useful. A cutting is just a piece of plant material that is removed from the plant to propagate a genetically identical or cloned plant. There are 5 main types of cutting, which is hardwood, softwood, semi-ripe, root and leaf. However, as you'll see, there are a range of different methods for propagating cuttings, and some will work better than others with certain plants. Now, first of all, I just want to go into a little bit of detail about how you prepare a basic cutting. I have here a piece of plant material. This has been taken from my Gyrosine Herbstii, and I just want to show you the basics of what we're going to do with it, which is to remove all of these lower leaves, because leaves lose water through transpiration, and therefore by removing as many of these leaves as we can, then we're reducing the amount of water that this cutting is losing. At the moment it doesn't have any roots, so it can't take up any water in the way that a plant normally would. So now we've removed all the lower leaves, just leaving a couple of leaves on the top to help it photosynthesize. Now at the moment this cutting is a little bit too long. You can see all the leaf nodes coming down here. These are the points at which the leaf is growing from, and you want to take it back to about 6 leaf nodes, and it should be approximately about the length of your finger. So I'm going to cut just below the leaf node here. Nice sharp cut straight across, and I have my cutting. Now I've placed my cuttings for now into my cuttings box, which is a sealed container with a layer of sphagnum moss and perlite, just to make sure it stays damp but the air can still get around the roots when they start to grow. A lot of people will take out a polythene bag just to make sure you don't lose too much water while you're collecting the rest of your cuttings before you get to process them. So the first type of cutting that I want to talk about today are softwood cuttings. With a softwood cutting, they're normally taken from the growth tip of the plant. Now the best time of year to take a softwood cutting is in spring, because the plant is in active growth, and it is this growth that's going to help stimulate the roots to grow. Of all the types of cuttings, softwood cuttings have the highest rate of success in growing new roots. However, also are the ones most likely to die in the process with rot, because they haven't got that woody exterior that helps to protect them, and they're losing a lot of water through transpiration. Now personally, my favourite method for propagating softwood cuttings is to use water. You can use water in a variety of different ways. You can either use an empty glass bottle that you've got lying around, or any container really that you can put water into and place the cutting into. Or you can use an aeroponic propagator, and this will spray the water around the roots while allowing the air to still circulate around the roots, which helps to prevent rot. The next type of cutting that I want to talk about is the Greenwood cutting. Now this one's not so often talked about. It's kind of in between a softwood cutting and a semi-ripe cutting. And with the Greenwood cutting, I'm going to use this bit of grapevine as an example. It hasn't turned woody, but it is a lot firmer than the softwood cutting. That extra rigidity is going to help to give that a bit more stability while it's trying to root. So the Greenwood cutting is less likely to wilt than a softwood cutting, and it will be taken late spring into early summer. Next, I want to talk about the semi-ripe cutting. So this is a cutting where the stem has just started to turn a little bit woody down at the bottom, but is still soft, just like this softwood cutting would have been at the top. So you've still got the growth tip here, and it's just starting to firm up as you go down. Semi-ripe cuttings are taken midsummer to mid-autumn. The stems are beginning to harden, they're starting to become a bit more woody, and the tip of the stem is still soft, and they do need high humidity still to keep them from drying out. Now, semi-ripe cuttings might take a little bit longer to root than a softwood cutting, therefore it may be that it doesn't root until a little bit later in the year, and if it is still rooting through winter, it may need a little bit of extra protection against frosts. Either you bring it indoors or put it in a greenhouse or a cold frame. Hardwood cuttings are normally taken from deciduous trees or shrubs, and they'll be taken through late autumn through to winter when the plant is dormant. With a deciduous tree, obviously it will lose its leaves through winter, therefore it won't be losing water through transpiration, and this will give it that little bit more time to root. And they do take longer to root from hardwood cuttings. Some cuttings may take up to a year to root. However, it does have overall a better success rate. Now, there's a couple of other types of cutting which aren't talked about quite so much. There's the evergreen cutting, which is very similar to a hardwood cutting. However, it's not taken from a deciduous tree or shrub. It's taken from an evergreen, so it does still have the leaves there, and therefore it is still going to lose water through transpiration. However, the process of taking an evergreen cutting is still very similar to taking a hardwood cutting. Now, with evergreens, of course, you can take them as softwood or semi-ripe cuttings earlier in the year with the new growth. However, if you are taking it later in the year, it's not a good idea to cover it with a polythene bag, because that would actually encourage more rot. You can pretty much ignore it through the winter months. The main thing to watch out for is to make sure that it doesn't dry out in hot summers. A variation of the cuttings that I've just talked about is called a heel cutting. And this is a cutting where when you're taking a side shoot off the plant, you leave a little bit of that woody heel from the main trunk on that cutting, and that will just give it a little bit of extra protection against rot. So that once I've removed these lower leaves and prepared the cutting in the way that we prepared the other cutting earlier, then what you're left with just has that little bit extra firmness there at the bottom. And then, just like the heel cutting, we've got the mallet cutting. This is very similar. You've got a side shoot that was growing off a main stem, and you've cut the main stem either side of the side shoot. Once you've put this in your growing medium, then that is going to help protect your side shoot from rotting. So it will increase the success rate of your cutting rooting. The next type of cutting that I want to talk about is root cuttings. Root cuttings are normally taken in winter when the plant is dormant. It's important to remember that the root needs to be large enough to store enough energy to be able to produce new roots and shoots, because it won't yet have any leaves to produce food. So a small root like this is probably not going to work, whereas a larger one like this has a much better chance of propagating. Root cuttings are more likely to be successful with plants that naturally produce pups, like the tetrapanics. When you're taking root cuttings, you should always try to remember to take them from as close to the crown of the plant as possible. When preparing your root cutting, it's important to know which part is at the top and which part goes down into the ground, because that will make a difference to it when it's growing. So when you're preparing your root cutting, just going to simply snip away the section at the top and at the bottom, so that you've got a nice segment of root here, and then you're going to plant that root into your growing medium. Now, some plants can be propagated through whole leaf cuttings or even sections of leaf cuttings. With the sections of leaves, a begonia is absolutely perfect. And if you have a begonia rex leaf, which is very veined, as you can see here, then this would make a perfect cutting of a sectional leaf cutting. A whole leaf cutting works best with things like succulents. So I'm going to be very careful using the tongs to handle this cactus. Something like this opuntia, I have cut off a section of the opuntia, which is the equivalent of a whole leaf, and this will make a perfect cutting. I'm just going to pop this into my growing medium and allow that to root. So the final type of cutting that I want to talk about today is layering or air layering. Now, this is a perfect technique if you want to make sure that the cutting remains alive while it is forming roots. This is a technique in which you will make a cut in the stem of the plant and put damp soil or sphagnum moss to cover the wound that you've just made. Then this growing medium will promote root growth. The roots will be able to develop while the main plant is still keeping your cutting alive, and then once you have a root ball, you can remove the cutting from the main plant and you will have a whole new plant. Some plants do air layering naturally. They will produce runners and the new plants will form on these runners so that the parent plant can keep it alive while the new plant is growing. If the stem of your plant can actually reach the soil, then that's perfect for layering, because then you can just use a heavy stone or a brick to weigh that stem down where you've put the wound, and then that weight will keep the contact with the soil until the roots have formed. And finally, I just want to recommend this book by the Royal Horticultural Society on propagating plants. This will have all the information that you need to propagate cuttings, including the methods of how to do it, but also very specific information about individual plants, which will help you know which types of cuttings will work best with different types of plants. If you're enjoying this content, then please do make sure you're subscribed to my channel. This is still a new channel, so every subscriber really does make a difference. You can also turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss any of my new videos. And please let me know what you think in the comments, because they really do help my channel to grow. You can also follow me on social media for links to my latest videos and my photo of the day, in which I usually share photos of flowers from my garden, along with their names if known. You can follow me on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, or you can join my Facebook group to ask questions or share photos. And you can find all of my YouTube videos on the Freya's Tropical Garden website, which I will also be expanding to provide advice pages as well as items for sale. Links to these pages are included in my description.